You're listening to Level Up Weekly on Radio Harbor Country. Tune in live on the air at WRHC 106.7 and WRHC 93.5 or on the web at www.radioharborcountry.org. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the world of Level Up Weekly, a bounteous, open podcast filled with amazing loot, legitimately challenging enemies, but not too difficult to defeat, and of course, the EXP. Join our fellow big headphone adventurers Dylan the Dude and Spernaday as they journey on a quest to find the EXP from gaming news and discussion. Hello everybody, welcome to Level Up Weekly, your weekly EXP for gaming news, and today I am beyond excited because today we talk about our favorite thing in video games. The guy who comes in saving the princess toward the end of the game and then bakes him a cake. We talk about the person, the hero of time. We talk about many other iconic characters that have shown. We talk about the 3-minute ladder or something like that and why that was considered significant. But in general, we talk about heroes and why video game protagonists are the way that they are, why they're considered iconic, why they've successfully kept on over the years, why franchises like Nintendo has thrived off of Mario, and how Sega surprisingly still reaps off of Sonic benefits, and how Metal Gear Solid has had their monumental success in the past, and even other classic games in the past, such as Contra and Street Fighter and many other ones. And today is going to be exciting because we get to talk about all the different heroes that have been across video games, their popular times, the 80s, 90s. Today, I sound like a radio show. Haha, that's funny because this is. Welcome to the radio show here. Level Up Weekly on WRHC and WRHC 106.7 and, goodness gracious, 93.5.
93.5, yes!
Nailed it. Cool. We hope that you are enjoying this beautiful, beautiful Thursday night. Or if it's not Thursday night, hi, my name is Fernaday, a.k.a. Jordan, if you want to call me that
and
too.
And I'm Dylan the Dude.
Yes, and together, we are Level Up Weekly, a weekly podcast where we try to give you the next level experience. And that next level experience is typically in the form of gaming news and different forms of variations of topics. We've gone as far as studying psychology and why people are jerks to each other online. And we've discussed other things, like we've had interviews with people now from Ready Player One and from the Rocket League Championship Series, esports production, and now AAA movie film production in front of Steven Spielberg. Man, Dylan, we have a cool resume.
We really do. And
not as cool as some other people. Like, I'd like to interview some game developers in the future. I'd love to talk to some people from Psionic Studios in particular, but I really would like to.
That would be pretty cool.
Shigeru Miyamoto is another one on my bucket list for Level Up Weekly. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll do something like that in the future.
But if you want to listen to any of those other great guests that we've had, you can find them on our iTunes page. Search Level Up Weekly on iTunes or on Podbean. Just search Level Up Weekly. Find us right there.
And, of course, support us out on Patreon. But that's different. We'll talk about that at the end. Right here, we're talking about heroes, okay? And heroes are an important thing in our lives because heroes are what make us awesome and make us wear funny costumes at Halloween. And like me, apparently act like them in skits as a young kid. Not talking about the fact that I used to own a Mario hat and had overalls back in the day. And during Halloween, I had a sound effects maker that, if you ask Austin about this, he'd probably hate this, by the way, Dylan. But that just jumped around with the sound effect of the jump that went on while I did that. Wow. I'm a nerd.
Well, so, as Mario would say, here we go. First off, in order to kind of think about what makes a hero, let's go with the dictionary definition. Make sure we're all on the same page here. What makes a hero, as defined by dictionary.com, is a person who is admired or idealized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. And the term hero was usually applied to mythology or mythological heroes like Hercules, but has kind of been adapted into the modern times, according to Lucien Boya. And thanks to movies, television shows, and most importantly, as we're going to talk about today, video games, has kind of expanded what makes a hero into a very broad category. What do you think of when you hear hero, Jordan?
When I think of hero, I think of, and I'm just going to talk video games for a minute. I'm not even talking about movies. When I think about the hero, I think about how that individual made an impact in the game, that he was either and there's some different instances. One of them being how that character was portrayed as a hero because they were the last man standing, last woman standing, whatever you want to consider. And they were basically the last hope to humanity or something in a drastic standard, where they had to be that guy or girl that comes in, saves the day, and rescues the country, the nation, the world, the universe. I mean, just imagine that sequence. I also imagine a hero as someone willing to put themselves out and be in front of the pack and be willing to face danger in the mixes of when you potentially may die, and to be able to show an example to your group, but to your comrades forward. So I think that's another important thing to keep in mind as well. I think we lost Dylan. He's dead. Dylan was so surprised at how I considered my heroes that he cried. And now he's gone.
I'm back. Sorry, little glitch there, but I do like your definition of a hero. To me, and to famed psychologist Kenneth Burke, or rhetoric studier Kenneth Burke, yes, we're actually using some academic sources here on this episode.
We always use academic sources. What are you talking about?
Yes, but in this case, we're actually naming it. And for Kenneth Burke and for me, one of the most important things of kind of analyzing heroes, or analyzing anyone in this case, under the lens of dramatism, which is, why do these characters do what they do? What makes these heroes heroic? Like, why do they do what they do? Why do they put everything on the line to protect the innocent? Or why do they work towards this goal? And that's one thing that I'm going to really analyze with a lot of my picks for this episode.
Just as a side note, Dylan, just to make sure, you may want to just turn my volume down on Discord a slight bit, because I think I'm getting a little bit of you a second time. So just watch that. But anyway,
all right, will do.
Let's talk about, what are we trying to accomplish with this here? Why are some of these heroes really considered as iconic as they are before? Why does Mario still exist today and most people know them, even for the young 5-year-old kids today? Like, how did they know who Mario is versus back in the 80s? Why was he such an iconic character? I mean, what some other things beyond that too? Why is Street Fighter still an existent thing today? And of course, Pac-Man and some other things in that mixture too. So let's just take the 80s, take the 90s, take today, 2000s first, and then today, and just analyze that based on who we've seen come up during those times, and if they're still going on today, why they're still existent, why they just didn't get canned to the curb for some reason.
And let's kind of do this back and forth, kind of shoot one for you, one to me, one to you, one to me, because we both have our own list here and our own thoughts on what makes these characters iconic heroes. So why don't we start off with a classic?
There's a lot of classics. We're starting in the 80s,
There's a lot of classics.
We're starting in the 80s, and I'm going to tell you right now, almost everything in the 80s was considered classic. For me, most of my stuff was Nintendo, because I grew up Nintendo. I grew up really enjoying a lot of the old flavors that they had to offer. And one of the things that I had to think about was the original Donkey Kong. And that one to me is crazy, because when you think about that, the original Donkey Kong was basically almost argumentatively a protagonist portrayed in the situation, but then created as a protagonist in the future. So to see how Donkey Kong came out originally, in light terms, stealing Mario's girl and then heading to the top of a tower and throwing barrels down like as if that was his day job, then going out and saying, you know what, I shouldn't do this. Now I'm just going to go save the world type of thing. That's a classic Donkey Kong for me right there.
Well, his motivations, especially in the original Japanese version, actually paint him to be a little bit more sympathetic. Because the original Donkey Kong was actually more or less a slave to Mario and was mistreated in the Japanese version. And that's why he snapped, stole Mario's girlfriend, and climbed up and, made the iconic game we know of today. However, upon his reboot in the 90s is when you really got a firm grasp of Donkey Kong as being kind of a little bit more simple, just a ape that likes bananas and adventure. And he eventually fought against a bunch of enemies in his jungle to maintain the peace, to maintain the freedom that Donkey Kong and his friends, Diddy Kong, Cranky Kong, that they had. So a very simple core motivation for Donkey Kong was to fight for freedom. And that's what I really enjoy about Donkey Kong, the character.
Fight for the freedom of his bananas. Primarily.
And the ability to wear a tie. And nothing else.
And yeah. I wish I could portray that type of costume, but I'd get arrested. And no one would like to see that anyway. So, anyway. Awkward wardrobe choices later. Let's talk about another one here, Dylan. For you, go ahead and choose your next one on your list.
Well, I chose Private Bill Reiser and Private Lance. These are the two playable characters from the hit SNES game, my mistake. Contra, released in 1984. So, Contra was not a very story-driven game. You basically took the form of one or two private special operatives out in the jungles trying to use guerrilla warfare to fight aliens and other evil enemies that you'd find along the way. And the motivations for these guys are very simple and very relatable. Fighting for their country, fighting for their people, fighting for the safety of their friends and loved ones. The motivations for these two men are just fighting for freedom, fighting for their country, fighting for their people. This is a lot more backstory than was usually typical at the time. And while it's not a lot, it kind of does fit in with the general theme of the 80s. Because games didn't really start getting these big, epic narrative stories that we usually think of when we think of big video games until the 90s or 2000s. So while they may have been simpler in the 80s, I don't believe their motivations or what makes them heroes really is any less just because they were in a simpler time. Sometimes less is more, and in their backstories, that certainly is the case to me.
I think the important thing to remember is that in the 80s, most characters were just portrayed as 8-bit figurines that you maybe identified 3, 4 maximum colors on each system to it. And these characters weren't considered the major icon that they were back in the day, up comparison to at least today, because they weren't thrown on t-shirts all over the place. They were just a video game that sold very well because it was a fun game to play, and it was something that was thrown in arcades across the board, or something that just people really enjoyed when they played back at home. That's one of the big important things that it was in the 80s, was just putting that console in people's homes, putting that arcade system in people's gaming areas, and really just making it about enjoying the experience of what that game had to offer for the introductory period of video games were. Another one that I'm going to throw on here. Go ahead. Sorry.
I don't think I could have said it better myself. I mean, gaming back in the 80s was not the monumental culture it is today. It wasn't as well recognized as it is today. So you have very few very popularized characters of the 80s unless they remained big and got put into merchandising in the 90s or 2000s.
Yeah, you really didn't see a lot of that. I mean, for example, today, I'll use one example. Actually, we'll talk about that later. I was going to say use my comparison for Minecraft, but that's not really applicable in this case, so let's keep that out. Next one I got on here is, of course, talking about how the classic Samus Aran, who back in the day, no one really knew if she was actually male or female. I mean, all that you knew was that you were a mercenary back then, and you were out fighting intergalactic space monsters and trying to save Metroid. And that, at the end of the day, was your goal, was your important thing that you needed to do. And one of the things that really came into it was just the introduction of someone who was going out into intergalactic space, fighting creatures, and just saving the day, literally, for the galaxy.
And Samus is a very interesting example because she was just a bounty hunter fighting aliens, and as on its own, that's not really enough to become iconic. But there's two things that I like to attribute to her becoming as well known as she is now. And that is her iconic suit design, because everyone recognizes that. Everyone recognizes that orange suit going into the morph ball. And just all of her attacks and everything are just so iconic at this point in gaming history. But also the fact that she might be the first real non-sexist depiction of a woman in gaming.
But the funny thing is that, like I said before, in the 80s, I mean, yeah, you had that one cheat sequence where you could actually, I guess take off her suit. But even back then, it wasn't really that identifiable. Remember, this is the 80s. This is 8-bit technology that we dealt with. That was something that we didn't really know about at the time. Theoretically, we didn't really see a lot of feminine hero portrayals until we saw Lara Croft, and we'll talk about her later on as that goes out. Other thing that we've got here too, of course, Nintendo was well known to portray a lot of their characters here, because that was their ground, that was their startup. They were one of the big innovative companies that came behind it. Nintendo got their name and is respected among people today because of the fact that they blew up in the 80s and 90s. Granted, of course, they've had their burnouts, but everyone else has. But the NES, when that was released, they were able to release other iconic people. Kirby, as an example, was the initial startup, but really didn't hit the market, hard until, like we talked about before in the pre-show, was that we really didn't see Kirby hit off until the 90s, theoretically speaking, because in the original, Kirby was a cool character that went out and he, was just a simple, it wasn't even pink at that time. He was just,
he was white.
He was just a simple, I don't even remember what the whole color context was behind it, but just like you said, he was pretty much white/gray. I mean, he wasn't
it was black
colored
and white
by any means. It was a very vintage game for that.
And it's actually funny. People wouldn't really consider Kirby an iconic character until the 90s. Of course, that's also because that's where he got his iconic pink color scheme and the Kirby Dream Land series. And he wasn't really super fleshed out in his original game either. A lot of these characters didn't have a lot to their character except for generic good guy or girl that went out to fight evil and fight for their friends, their family. That ends up being the motivation for a lot of people. But the 80s was not all glory, sunshine, and happy heroes. We also had some very selfish, egotistical, and dare I just say it, bad representations of heroes, even as early as the 80s. And the example I'm going to give for that is the always controversial Leisure Suit Larry.
Oh, Larry. Larry was always really interesting to me because Leisure Suit Larry, like you said, he was just portrayed as this character that looked out for himself. He looked out for what he was interested in, and yet he was still theoretically considered a protagonist because you played as that character fighting off the quote-unquote bad guys. That was one of the things that was always crazy to me about Leisure Suit Larry. Excuse me.
And of course, a lot of the later Leisure Suit Larry games would get banned due to explicit sexual content. But the
Because
early
Leisure
games,
Suit Larry, it's kind of obvious where he was walking with that line.
So I would say he's a perfect example of a bad protagonist, or I would very dare even call him a hero.
Yeah, I don't know if I would really use the term hero in this case. Protagonist, definitely. Protagonist, it does fit along that line because protagonist, by definition, is really rather someone who is out to, well, is basically fighting the enemy. You're considered the quote-unquote hero in this instance. By exact definition, like you said, it's not purely a hero, but other than that, excuse me, another couple other ones that started out in the 80s that I'll point out to is Link, Mario, even Solid Snake had its original beginnings. I want to talk about Snake more so in the 90s, though, because in the 80s, Snake wasn't necessarily portrayed as Snake necessarily, and I mean that by the game was a changing platform. No one ever really saw Snake in this format before, where you could stealthily move around this 8-bit environment and you're trying to, cause as little noise as possible, and you'd rather not fight off 35 different guys. You'd rather wait for them to turn the corner and take them out from behind or something in that mix. With Mario, I mean, that was the old classic. That's the one that everyone's going to generically know about because Mario's roots started out and was fairly successful because of the fact that the game was really fun to play. It was a platforming game that you moved on to the next level, and everyone would be talking about it at their school from that point. I mean, Link is in the same kind of mixture as well. These were characters that when they started out, and I'm talking about Mario and Link here, that when they started out, they hit the ground running when it came to their hero ability, because you identified with them. I mean, Mario, thank you, Peach. Thank you, but the princess is in another castle. Your job was simple. You were the person saving the damsel in distress. And technically saying same situation in Link as well. You're saving the damsel in distress. That was the classic story. That's what it used to be way back in ancient times. That was your story. Someone was saving the damsel, the princess, the queen, someone, and they were going out and trying to rescue them.
Well, like we said, the concept of a hero originally started back with some old stories in mythology, like Hercules. And one of Hercules' things was that he had to save the damsel in distress. And that was a common theme there. And I think that motivation is really something that helped put Mario and Link on the map because it's a very relatable goal. Who doesn't want to save the princess and be the big hero of the kingdom?
Yeah, you're exactly correct. I think that covers us pretty much for the 80s. I mean, there's some other ones we could add in there for fun because we're talking about heroes. Of course, Pac-Man really isn't saving anybody. I mean, the goal of the game was fairly simple, to not get eaten by ghosts, and you were trying to just feed yourself through. I don't know if you really want to add that in there. Ryu was introduced over in 1987 via Street Fighter. Of course, Ryu was kind of generalistically with the rest of the Street Fighter crew. I don't think he really stuck out specifically as much as the other characters did. His story, his background was better portrayed in the 90s when they actually put a Street Fighter movie together.
Yeah, and that's kind of something you can say about most games in the 80s is that they didn't really get expanded on until the 90s. And in my personal opinion, the 90s is where video game story and characters really hit the ground running and got better defined.
Which is where I kind of want to go with next here, because this is now where we're starting to hit, like you said, this is where we're starting to see the actual stories behind it. This is where I want to start by putting in what I was talking about with Snake. In the 90s, when the games originally came out here, especially for the PlayStation, if I remember correctly, original Metal Gear Solids, man, that's beautiful to go back to those days, because when you went on comms and you went out to those cutscenes, you just, there's always fun to just hear the silly banter that came behind it. But more importantly, it was about you recognizing that you were a super soldier and you were there to save the day, to save it from this super evil organization, And at the end of the mission, you felt satisfied because you did it your way. And that was one of the things that Metal Gear Solid did well. And that's why Solid Snake has been portrayed the way that he has been. Because he, in of itself, is this character that he plays out to be this tough, just tough. I don't know what the better word I could use for other than the fact this guy is tough, resilient, and extremely good at what he does. And people recognize that, and they want to be able to use that as something for your personal mind to imagine.
And I do believe that in the 90s, most video game protagonists and heroes kind of became a little bit more gritty, edgy, a little bit more realistic than a lot of the heroes that we had back in the 80s. And Solid Snake is definitely one of the clear examples of that. Another one that kind of leads into that as well, although also on a very goofy end due to what the games are well known for. And I'm going to go with 3 people right here: Chris Redfield, Leon S. Kennedy, and Jill Valentine from the Resident Evil series. Those are the first 3 protagonists from the first 3 games. And each of them are very similar in their motivations. They're trying to fight the big evil pharmaceutical company Umbrella and trying to fight for their lives to survive in a city or a mansion infested with zombies. These people were a little bit more gritty, a little bit more realistic than, say, Mario or Link or Kirby, Samus. The Resident Evil series is very well known for being darker and actually one of the first real survival horror games. And it's not easy to write a horror protagonist or a horror hero anymore. If you've noticed, even the trend in film, movie, any other medium, the protagonists usually end up just being victims that are there to die, there to make stupid mistakes, or just in general do things that, eventually lead to them triumphing over the big villain or whatever, whoever the mastermind is. And Resident Evil is no different. It's a very simple premise, a very simple plot, but the motivations of these characters is simply to survive, and if they do any good along the way, it's definitely a good thing to them. But in a survival horror game, their primary motivation needs to be to survive. And that's why I think makes them kind of more realistic and just overall more relatable main characters.
Having that human aspect was a really important thing in the Resident Evil series. Like you said, these guys weren't like some super creature that could do something insane with themselves. I mean, they weren't Link, who had the ability of to be the hero of time and have one of the 3 Triforce triangles. Nice wording. Along with them. And he wasn't like Mario, who could change his different abilities and be able to fly or to do other things. He was a character that were a character group that they were about surviving the situation at hand. Granted, the situation was a little bit, out of proportion, whether it be zombies or whatever the case. Their big thing was that you were not playing some super creature. You were playing as someone like you or like me. And it was the thing that really pushed the Resident Evil series to be successful as it was, because you could imagine yourself being there. You could imagine that realistic aspect to it. It wasn't a daydream fantasy. It was, maybe this could happen, And
it made the situation all that much scarier.
Exactly. Other ones that I could add to that from here, and this is where we talk a lot about female protagonists really being introduced into that mix. And that's something that I'd like to just touch on here for a couple minutes before we get into the generic one, which I'm sure all of you know about, and it's on your Christmas list. In 1990s, Lara Croft started out in Tomb Raider. For those of you that don't know who Lara Croft is, I'm sorry for you, because she is one of the coolest people that you will ever read and do research on. But of course, being that she's so popularized, that it's unfortunate that a lot of people are like, but she gets stereotyped and sexualized really badly nowadays. Well, look at what it was back in the day. She broke some Guinness records for being one of the most popularized and well-known characters that are shown that are female protagonist characters in video game history, because of the fact that when she started out, she was an adventurous young soul wanting to go out and do her thing. She wanted to, and like we said again in the pre-show, we talked about how we considered Lara Croft to be like the original Nathan Drake, this pursuit for adventure, but at the same time fighting off any bad guys that seem at hand. And like we said a second ago with Resident Evil, they weren't some superhuman out of proportion. Granted, of course, now doing some game theory science that Matt Pat and his group has done, it apparently seems as though Lara Croft maybe is a little bit superhuman, or just more durable rather. But at the end of the day, she was a startup to being one of the iconic characters that really made female protagonists a really cool thing to see in video games if done correctly.
And that's definitely something that I've noted a lot when I play video games, is that there's always this weird representation of women. You usually get, kind of just the stereotypical damsel in distress. With Lara Croft, you really got the first ever action girl, one of the first, with Samus Aran from Metroid being another one. And a lot of people in the recent years have given Bayonetta a lot of praise for being a strong, action-oriented woman. I actually very much disagree with that, as in terms of Bayonetta, I feel like they kind of take a lot of characterization away from her and her motivations and kind of try to cover up with it with sex appeal or just a unique or more sexualized character design. Now, Jordan, what do you kind of think of someone like Bayonetta, who's, dressed the way she dresses in the game, versus Lara Croft, who kind of dresses more casually, more like a Indiana Jones type character?
I think I'll put it like this. Dylan, I put two women in front of you. Okay, you're single. All right, we're going to ignore that asset. We're just going to say you're single, okay? One is wearing a fully decked out leather suit, tight to the skin, zippers down to show a slight bit of cleavage. Very attractive woman, okay? Another is a fairly attractive woman, but she looks like she just came back from a trekking adventure. She's probably a very intelligent woman and has been out, probably an architect of some sort based off of the clothing that she has on, which is simply a tank top and khakis. At the end of the day, you look at those two characters, how they dress, okay? Your mind, not your logical mind, but your initial knee-jerk thought. What are you going to say about seeing those two different characters between each other?
I will not lie. My initial knee-jerk reaction would probably be the dominatrix-looking type woman in a leather suit showing cleavage.
See, that's the thing. I agree. Bayonetta is a great character that has shown to be a great female protagonist. She's iconic. I want to use the term, but I can't because we're on the radio. What's the, you know what I'm talking about, Dylan. What's the way I could portray this? She's BA. There. We'll just be nice.
Kick butt.
She's kick butt. Sure. Let's use that. We'll be nice. She's kick butt. She just is an overall tough, resilient character, just like we said before. And she has been shown to have a lot of different powers beyond that. But the thing is that take the normal person that is going to see that initial thought. They're not going to go behind the whole plot behind the situation. It's like when you first see someone for the first time ever, your first thought is not likely, boy, I think they're probably a really smart engineer. You're likely going to be thinking something about physical appearance. That's not always statistically true, but it's shown to be, at least in my opinion, 80 to 90% true. And that's just because I'm a male. And it probably applies to females too. But anyway, that's another story. We're not professionals with psychology. But
I mean, just bluntly about it, she is more sexualized. She does actually have a good story, and if you actually play her games, she has great motivations for what she does. But you don't usually see that because it's overshadowed by her just sex appeal, by her costume, by her skin-tight, cleavage-revealing costume.
And that's what I'm getting at. The character is a great thought. It's another great female protagonist that we've seen in history. But that the reason that I respect and continue to admire Lara Croft for being the great protagonist that she was created as is that she had this thrill for adventure, to be resilient, to be willing to train, to make herself better. She was still a human at the end of the day. She did not have these magical, crazy abilities. She was just like you and me, but she trained her butt off to be able to become who she became in the long haul. And that's why she was able to overcome some of the insane obstacles that you get over the video game sequence. And of course, the joke being is that she matured from square boobs to regular boobs over timeline. And
gotta love HD.
Thanks to that created opportunities for other characters. Another one that I have on here that ties well with this is Chun-Li. Street Fighter was introduced here, Street Fighter 2 more or less, and one of the things that was really cool about Chun-Li coming into the mix is that now you have this situation where, Street Fighter was predominantly a lot of males just duking it out, having a good time with your buddies, having that arcade feel to it. Chun-Li came into the mix. She was quick, she was extremely agile, and she was a really fun character to play. And to this day, still a very fun character to play. And I think, in my opinion, one of the things that I really appreciated about Lara Croft coming into the mix is that she helped other female characters that were created at this time really shine in their time of darkness, which is they made them popular to be able to come out more in video games.
Yeah, and with Lara Croft, it was more about her motivations rather than her look. It was more about what she wanted to do. She wanted to find the truth. She wanted to find the treasure. And that's so much more of an admirable reason than just, I want to battle these aliens while looking really attractive. And it was just a very good jump for women in the gaming industry.
Now, of course, Dylan, this is the 90s. You know what came out during the 90s. It's really funny. Google search this if you want while you're listening to this show. If you're in the car listening to this show, though, do it later. Find your favorite protagonists. Google top 10 best protagonists. A lot of your lists are going to find this character here. Dylan, he's on your list. I'm going to let you take it away.
Are you talking about our furry buddy that has become
No, he's not cool. He's not number one on most of them. No, I'm talking about Gordon Freeman, my man. I'm talking about the man that has been behind the joke of when Half-Life 3 is going to be coming out for years and why he's been considered such the iconic character that he is today.
So I do kind of want to say something that's really funny about this character. Gordon Freeman is the protagonist, the hero from the Half-Life series. Now, this is funny because he basically is just an average college graduate, like you or me, and maybe a little bit more of a scientific field. I believe it's biological. He's a biological engineer, right?
If I recall correctly, yes.
Yeah. So basically just like us, just graduating college. And he gets thrown into quite the insane situation. How is it that someone with no military training, about the same as us, about having our physiology, hell, I think you might actually be more buff than this character. I think he's more close to my body type. And he manages to... You were saying?
I was just saying potentially. I don't think that's quite true, though.
And he ends up being able to fight off hordes and hordes and hordes of aliens, mutants, alien mutants, evil scientists, evil mercenaries, all just in the name of survival and for science.
This is why a lot of people put him on the top of the list, is because he's a character that can be semi-similar to a lot of us. He can be in this position where he's, like you said, he's just this normal guy, and apparently he has to save the world because that's Gordon Freeman. That's Half-Life. That's going out into the expansive world that is Half-Life's world and doing some of the things that he's done before. Some of the environments. Half-Life 2 was insane to play for me personally, mainly because I hated the fact that those bugs were the most annoying thing that my ears have ever heard in their life before. But thank you, audio engineers at working for Half-Life Valve Studios. And outside of that, and complaining about audio, I think that it was crazy that this character was just put into a position that if you owned a PC, you played Half-Life. It could have been online, it could have been as the campaign, but you were aware of what the story was like. You knew what it was like to be able to enter into Black Mesa and learn about the scientific technologies that come behind the things that they were doing in this world. And that's why he's been it's kind of like putting Star Trek in with nerds. It's something that you wish that it was there in the future, but it's not quite there yet, or it's sort of there, but it's not fully. And that's kind of what Gordon Freeman was like. He was the character that we could put our shoes in and enjoy what was going on, but at the same time acknowledge that we were in like dire situations and that we had to fight things off like we did.
He also never spoke, which was also something that kind of made you more likely to put yourself in his shoes, more likely for you to kind of use him as your self-insert.
Isn't that crazy? How characters, I don't mean to cut you off, but this is a thought that I have. It's crazy, like characters like Link and Gordon Freeman have never said a word ever, but they're one of the best characters that we've ever seen before because of the fact of the way that they portrayed that character through their actions and not necessarily through what they said.
It makes it kind of easier to identify with, and I'm not sure why that is, but that's kind of just how it is.
Because you don't have to sound like him, you don't have to look like him, but you can act like him.
For Link, do you count the hi-ya?
Well, I mean, I wasn't talking about audio. I was talking about the fact that he never talked. I mean,
like dialogue.
He made a bunch of grunts. I mean, that's cool. But I'm talking about the fact that he never specifically talked to someone. He just nodded. He accepted things. He did little things. Of course, he had his infamous Link language, which is ha-pa and all of that. But that was Link, and that's, back in the 80s. But whichever, it's still applicable to today.
Kind of reached his pinnacle or zenith in the 90s, though, with Ocarina of Time and Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask being huge releases in the 90s.
Majora's Mask was actually, no, I'm going to go Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time was really the game changer because that's when you took that small town kid and you turned him into the man who came up and fought against someone who stole practically almost all power from an entire nation and was able to single-handedly defeat him through trials and quests and tribulations across the journey. Which is another thing to add in to this discussion, Dylan, is that all of these characters typically went through some form of struggle and strife before they ended up facing their final boss. Of course, I'll continue to use Link's example, where every story that Link is put in, he starts out with the sword, and that sword will eventually either be upgraded as a different sword, and he'll have different outfits and apparel that he gets from trials, from quests, from temples that he's gone to before, and learn about different skills that he could use then later at the final boss. So it's kind of like in a schooling system where you take a bunch of assignments and quizzes and you put them all together to make the test, and then the test turn into the final exam, which is the final boss. And if you do it right, then you feel awesome about it because then you did something good.
Man, Jordan, you just turned the arduous process of doing a semester in school sound actually cool.
It's like as if you go through levels, kids. It's just like as if you go through levels. Whenever you're feeling down and don't like school, just remember that.
And we level up weekly.
And also listen to listen to us on our podcast. It'll make you smarter, guaranteed.
So, speaking of that, there's one person that I alluded to earlier, and I kind of want your opinion on him. What do you think of Sonic the Hedgehog as an iconic hero?
See, this one's weird to me because when he first started out, he was a character that Nintendo had Mario. Mario was blowing up. It was going into strides that we've never seen before. And then we go into Sonic the Hedgehog and Sega because Sega realized that Mario's equation was a great success. So therefore, they needed their own Mario to say. That's where Sonic came in. They acknowledged that they needed someone that was identifiable, that was extremely skilled at what they did, and they were able to do what they did well. And that's where Sonic came in and was able to help out with what they did. And in the beginning, it was great to see what Sonic put together. But at the end of the sequence, you saw how he really wasn't the same character that you saw beforehand. I mean, his cartoon shows nowadays show how he was just this insulting his fan base, basically. Granted, they're kind of weird to start with, but that's a totally different discussion. But that was Sega's portrayal of creating a Mario in their equation.
Sonic's one of the hardest characters to really take seriously or to kind of understand throughout his entire lifespan because he has undergone a few different iterations from being just a normal animal saving, robot fighting guy into the more anthropomorphic kind of modern day. I don't even know how you would describe him nowadays.
They tried to take the original cartoon Sonic the Hedgehog, which was rolling around at the speed of sound, blah, 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 and turning him into a 3D and more humanistic / realistic character that he is today. You know, portrayed in Sonic Boom, of course, now showing to have different things, different little physical traits. His legs are longer, some other little things. They try to make him more of an appealing character to real life. To its respect, of course, he doesn't look like a human still, but you get what I'm coming from.
I mean, if you would have told me that any one video game hero that they would try to make look more realistic, and you would have told me Sonic the Hedgehog, I would have said you're crazy.
Yeah, I would have also said I was crazy too.
But here we are, and Sonic has very simple motivations, you know, just save the day against the evil Dr. Robotnik. But what has it turned into over the years?
It's a company trying to keep their self afloat with the character that they tried to fight and compete with for many, many years. And that's something that is difficult to do. It is difficult to keep the same consistency as, of course, when they transitioned from 2D to 3D, they had a bunch of different challenges. How are they going to make the character? Of course, the other fun thing is that they had to worry about actually putting in dialogue for this character, unlike Mario, and some other little functionality things that came to that situation. Another one. Go ahead.
Because nothing really screams heroic dialogue to me like "You're too slow."
I mean, yeah. If you're the guy that can almost travel at the speed of light, I guess I'd kind of say you're too slow too. To be fair, if you're a cocky guy who likes chili hot dogs and saving the world from a guy whose name is Dr. Robotnik, aka Eggman.
Which name is more embarrassing?
Both. He used to go underneath a different name. I forgot the lore behind Sonic, but that's not what we're here to really study about is Sonic lore. Next thing I want to go through is kind of what you have on your list, honestly, Dylan, which is Doom Guy, which portrayed still today is just basically a guy who just says, hey, I have a bunch of things to blow up and just get rid of everything. Let me do that.
Well, to kind of quote Kenneth Burke is one of the main things that makes a character or a great way to study a character is why do these characters do what they do? And in some cases, mostly when it comes to first-person shooters, and especially back in the 90s, I don't think you can really go wrong with as simple of a motivation as fighting demons on Mars. That's literally what Doom Guy did. He went to Mars, he kicked the butt of a bunch of demons and alien demons, and that's all you need to know. He just fought for the goodness of mankind and just to kill aliens. I mean, demons, whatever they were.
Really? I think he's in a mixture where he isn't someone I'd take an example out of and be like, yeah, I could learn something from him and put it to my real life effect. But he's a guy that I would put in that list of people that I wish that I could have his job for like a day. Not literally, unless I was like way better than him or something.
I mean, it'd be a great way to release stress. And I kind of also included why I think Doom Guy, for all of his simplicity, is a good hero, while his counterpart, who's known as Duke Nukem, is the exact opposite. So the 90s was kind of a time...
is like the Vanilla Ice of hip-hop, or video games, I should say, before I screw up that mixture. And what I mean by that is that he was the guy that no one really liked, but he was someone nevertheless that existed and became popular no matter what. I mean, Vanilla Ice was a hip hop artist that a lot of people decided that he was just kind of overall bad at what he did. And I'll acknowledge that that's true. Some of his music is very subpar. But then again, I'm not that heavily into a 90s kid, so I can't bash everybody that's in that mixture. Sorry if you're a Vanilla Ice fan. Don't hurt me. But
yeah, all three of you.
Yeah, ouch. He said it, not me. Please block his Twitter, not mine. But whatever. Anyway, Duke Nukem was a character that was portrayed as, we said before, the tough butt character, where all of his life was just basically to, and I just like to jokingly say this, to live the thought American dream, which is you go, you kick people's butts that are bad, you get them out of here, and then you go back and you enjoy your life. And granted, he does this in a provocative way, but I think the reason that he's a really bad case for a hero is that he's just one of those characters that you go back and you look at and you go, is there really anything I could pull from Duke Nukem and say, I think I could use that in real life?
I kind of liken him to Leisure Suit Larry, who was just so hedonistic, so self-centered, so full of himself, that I really don't see him as having really good motivations. He's really all for himself. And to me, that just does not make a good hero.
I second that opinion. Duke Nukem is a guy that he was popular back in the 90s. He was a protagonist because he fought off bad dudes. And of course, everyone knows about Duke Nukem Forever, which came to the 2000s, which is a good time for us to get to the 2000s before this podcast runs out of time. And one of the things that's crazy to me is that Duke Nukem Forever is an absolutely weird game to play. So I'm going to just stop talking about it because I don't want to
26 years later.
Let's not talk about this.
So let's speed through this. So who do you think of when you think of 2000s in the modern era and heroes?
Well, I think one of my personal favorite picks, of course, with Mario is in the 2000s. The 2000s had who we portrayed earlier in a female version, which is Nathan Drake. Nathan Drake was a character that, if I was to be wholeheartedly honest with you, I would kind of dig to be as a person in real life. I mean, Dylan, I just need you to imagine this for me for a second. You discover lost cities. You discover ancient treasures that have the craziest puzzles behind it. You go out and you fight off different cartels that come up against you, and you're there for the thrill and adventure of your life. And that's what you do for a living. You got to think about that for a second.
That would be the greatest job ever.
Think about that. Like you're 85 years old. You're telling stories to your grandkids, and they're like, "My grandpa is like literally the coolest person ever." You know, that's what I think of when I think of Nathan Drake. He's a character that he's there to be charismatic, to be able to have a little bit of an ego. In all honesty, I think Nathan Drake is kind of like me, but way too adventurous.
And he has awesome motivations. I mean, he wants to discover things. He wants to figure things out. And if any danger comes to society or any of his friends, he does anything he can to save them.
He's willing to take the risk.
He's very adventurous. He's like a modern-day Indiana Jones.
Of course, there were some other picks in the 2000s that came up behind that. Your list is bigger than mine in this sequence, so I'd like you to kind of go through what you'd like to go through here.
Well, if you would have ever said that a lawyer would be one of the best heroes in video games,
objection!
I would have said you're crazy.
I do think that that's... No, actually, it's object. You can't overrule me. This is Phoenix Wright, dang it. You don't overrule me.
Now, Phoenix Wright, a very poor lawyer. I feel really sorry for him. Every case he deals with is a murder case, and he always has everything going against him. Just all of the possible evidence, all of the false testimonies. You, as Phoenix Wright, have to sort through all of that to prove your client innocent. And you only take innocent clients for the most part. And that's probably the biggest thing about Phoenix Wright. His sole motivation, his biggest motivation, is to find the truth. No matter how harsh, no matter how hard, or no matter what it will cost him personally, or even if it goes against his best interest, he needs to find the truth. And that is such an honorable quality that you don't actually find in a lot of protagonists.
Phoenix
like
Wright.
with Duke Nukem or Doom Guy, they kind of just exist to kick butt, and if they can trick their opponents, they'll trick their opponents.
Yeah.
Phoenix Wright is the poster child of honesty and integrity, and I believe that makes him one of the greatest heroes in all of video games.
But what about Master Chief?
What about Master Chief?
Wow.
Tell us about Master Chief.
I gotta tell him. You're the guy that played Xbox for so many years. I was the one that when I played an M for Mature game, his parents would be like, no, you can't do that.
Poor Jordan. Not ever able to experience the, no, you're a noob on Xbox Live.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that I avoided those times.
Master Chief, however, is kind of what would happen if you mixed the cool, snarky, kind of more kick-butt parts of Duke Nukem and all the best parts of Doom Guy with all the proper motivation of a Gordon Freeman. That all together makes a very compelling and interesting character who fights against the Covenant, the Flood, and a bunch of different races of aliens, all to protect humanity, a group of people that kind of shunned him for some military experimentation. So for him to put aside his grudge with humanity to fight to protect them is a very honorable and very commendable reason for him to go through all the outrageous stuff he goes through.
Right. And now we're getting a little close on time here, so I don't want us to get anything to that. I do want to put in a little light note. Of course, there are a ton of other protagonists that have been portrayed over the years in any time, even before really since video games were invented. And one of the things that we really wanted to take out of this is just why a character is able to be who they are and why they're considered heroes in our books. The main thing that I think I can take out of this today, Dylan, is that we consider a hero to be someone that, of course, has a distinct quality. Like we said before in the definition, is a person who's admired or idealized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. We saw those things from people from Mario, who has gone in and literally saved the galaxy before and done what he has saved in his time. Solid Snake, who was cloned into his situation all the way back in the 80s and conveying a totally different style of combat as in back in the day. And of course, Contra, showing kind of the original military, let's go save our nation type of traits behind it. Then, of course, we went into Gordon Freeman, who applied a lot to what we would be like if we were put into a sci-fi scenario, basically becoming our living, not literally, Star Trek. I mean that in the sense of the fan base. And of course, with people like we talked about with Chris Redfield, Kennedy, and Valentine from the Resident Evil series, and other people that fit into that mix, like Phoenix Wright, honesty, integrity, and the ability to uphold what is right and to be able to fight for your freedom, for your capability of being a true good human being. And of course, there are some other ones that are in that mixture as well that have shown us what we've seen here. Lara Croft, another good example for that too. Anything else like that in, Dylan?
Not much, aside from the fact that we've mentioned just a small fragment of the iconic heroes that exist in gaming. And we'd really like to hear from you about who you think are some of the most honorable or all in all just greatest heroes or protagonists in the history of gaming. Of course, you can do that down below or wherever you can comment on these podcasts.
Make sure to check us out here, guys. Podbean. Support us here over on Patreon. Follow us here on Twitter. Do all the great, beautiful things here, people. It has been another absolutely beautiful Thursday evening to listen to Dylan talk about the amazing capabilities and wonders of heroes and me tagging it in that conversation here. It has been a great time here as always. And of course it isn't a Thursday night. That's cool. Whatever. We are over here on WRHC and WRHC, and we hope that you guys will be tuning us in there live, radioharpercountry.org, in case you can't get to our local station for that time. Anyway, guys, this has been Level Up Weekly, and we hope that you guys enjoyed us here.
Tune in next week for more gaming news and discussion.